Transport workers and employers have agreed that the industry needs reform to ensure fair and safe conditions. Unions have warned of deadly consequences without change, saying the industry is in a state of crisis. And this focuses on the gig economy and transport workers. Joining me live is the Union Secretary, Kaine. Michael, thanks so much for your time. What has actually been achieved here?
Oh, good morning, Laura. Well, this is really a breakthrough. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese put the call out some weeks ago for industries to come together to see what common ground they could find. And the common ground in this industry is one that is a terrible story for Australia. And that is since the previous government got rid of the road safety watchdog in 2016, which was doing some work in this area, 1,100 Australians have lost their lives and 263 of those have been truck drivers. So this is an industry that clearly interfaces with Australian road users. It's an industry which is under incredible commercial pressure, and it's an industry that yesterday, responding to Minister Burke's call for a round table, came together and with one voice said we need a solution, we need it urgently, and we need the federal government to act.
What are the solutions then? I mean, because government intervention doesn't always work. So what have you agreed to with employers as a headline point, and what are these practical steps that are going to save lives?
Well, the first thing to acknowledge is this is a far-reaching pact. It has the clients in the industry, the customers like Coles and Woolworths. It has major transport operators, the industry associations, unions, and gig companies, and they're all calling with one voice for the government to put in place an independent body that can inquire into the pressures, the commercial pressures in this industry, which squeeze transport companies and squeeze transport operations. And of course that means that the workers that ultimately do the work are often forced to work too long or too fast to make a living, and that's a deadly recipe. So the solution here that has been put by the round table to the Minister is that we have an independent body that can inquire into those pressures and has the power to intervene and make sure that those pressures are lifted.
Okay, the pressures are well known. Does it all come down to the amount of time drivers are working for? And do you really need another separate body to police this?
Yeah, because this is an industry that's marked by supply chains. We've got those that get the benefit right at the top of supply chains. They're reaping the benefit, but they're not the one engaging the workers. The workers can be engaged 2 or 3 steps down the chain. So there's a real need for that to be addressed. And also, Laura, you mentioned in your introduction about the gig economy. The gig economies come like a tsunami. These are companies that are engaging workers completely outside of the system of protections that have been built up for decades in Australia. Sure. And that means they get an unfair competitive advantage, but also it means that those workers are under incredible stress, and sadly we've lost 11 of those workers in the last number of years. So this is urgent, this need for reform. It does need intervention, and there's a broad coalition calling unanimously for the government to intervene in this way, for an independent body to look into these pressures and lift them urgently.
Michael, Uber covers, I think, about 80% of the Uber Eats market, for example. What are you talking about there? And has Uber agreed to what exactly?
Yeah, well, Uber is the largest in Australia, both in rideshare and food delivery. DoorDash also agreed to these principles and to ask the Minister to intervene. And the reason for that, of course, is that they want proper recognition from the Australian community. The service that the Australian community has become accustomed to, that is receiving their food via an app, getting a rideshare, they want that to be legitimate, and they want the workers that they engage to be as safe as possible. But recognising that the way the work is given out in the gig economy is different, and the laws have failed to keep pace with that. So we're saying to the federal government, we need the laws to be updated. We need to make sure that we cater for this type of arrangement, but in such a way that doesn't dismantle and bring down standards across the rest of transport industry, because these things are interlinked. So it was a very important moment yesterday, monumental really. And we're really hopeful that in this new spirit of cooperation that the government listens very closely to what was said and acts very quickly.
So would you anticipate this body, for example, could limit the amount of hours that Uber Eats drivers could work?
Well, I think the key thing here is to make sure that gig workers are essentially brought back into the system, that there is a system that covers them, that there are standards, minimum standards that apply, because none of that exists in the gig economy at the moment. This is not just a question of hours, Laura. This is a question of these workers not having access to leave, no access to sick leave in the middle of a pandemic, no access to superannuation, no access to a minimum rate of pay. And so without those things being in place, it really is difficult to see how that sector can be stabilised. And of course, if that sector's not stabilised, it gets an unfair advantage against the traditional employers in transport who are doing the right thing. So this is all interlinked, and this is an urgent moment for us to act.
Michael, there is a tipping point here, do you agree? Because we're talking about a time where there's worker shortages across every sector, and I think most people recognise and would have seen it themselves, the worker shortage in that gig economy. If they can't get an Uber, they can't get a delivery on time. At the same time, you're talking about these standards needing to be improved, these workers perhaps being paid more, having more of a safety net, and restrictions on the industry itself. Is there a risk that this could be, this industry could be worse off?
There is a risk, but I think, Laura, the risk is the opposite one. That is that standards are so low at the moment that it's very, very difficult to attract people to work in the industry. Who would, quite frankly, want to work in an industry where they literally risk their lives, where they have to scrounge for work, where they have to go hell for leather to make a living for themselves and their families? If we can lift standards, it will be a win-win. You'll have more sustainable businesses, you'll have fair competition, and you'll have terms and conditions which attract workers. And I think that's what we all want. And this week, of course, as we go into the Jobs and Skills Summit, that's the type of thing that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time, to say the very least. Michael Kaine, thanks so much.